Welcome back to HFY Soundscape, the best channel for HFY sci-fi tales.
Most people think the end of the world sounds like a scream or a massive explosion. It doesn't. It sounds like a soft rhythmic hum of a life support system in a tin can floating 5 million miles from the nearest Starbucks. My name is Arthur Penhaligon, and I am the most expensive nothing in the United States Space Command. My official title is Deep Space Reconnaissance Officer, Grade 4. My unofficial title? The loneliest guy in the Orion Arm. I was stationed on Outpost 74, a jagged hunk of pressurized titanium bolted to a wandering moonlet. It was a place designed to be forgotten. The mission was simple. Sit in the dark, watch the long-range sensors, and make sure the Xylos hegemony didn't decide to move their border an inch closer to Earth. I'd been out here for 300 days. 300 days of recycled air, protein paste that tasted like wet cardboard, and a view of the stars that eventually starts to look like a firing squad. I wasn't a hero. I was a guy who was good at being alone. I had no medals, no legendary stories, just a record of perfect psychological stability in extreme isolation. But that stability was about to be tested, because on day 301, the sensors didn't just hum, they screamed. A signature appeared on my screen that shouldn't have existed. It was huge. It was fast. And it was heading straight for my tiny, defenseless bubble of air. Hold on before we get into the real stuff I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. The ship that dropped out of warp wasn't a scout. It wasn't a freighter. It was a spire of obsidian and violet light, a vessel of the Krellian Empire. These were the people who had glassed 3 systems in the last century just because someone looked at their ambassadors the wrong way. And at the head of this fleet was the Empress herself, Vera the Merciless. She was a legend of terror, a warrior who had personally dueled planetary champions and left them as trophies on her wall. The communications array sparked to life, a holographic projection shimmering into existence in the center of my cramped cabin. I expected to see a monster. I expected a giant, multi-limbed beast with teeth like serrated knives. Instead, I saw her. She stood 7 feet tall, covered in ornate, interlocking plates of ceremonial armor that glowed with a faint, dangerous heat. Her skin was a deep, shimmering sapphire, and her eyes were like burning embers. She looked like she could crush my skull with 2 fingers, and she probably intended to. The silence stretched between us, thick with the scent of ozone and the weight of impending death. I knew I had to say something. I had to be diplomatic. I had to represent humanity with dignity and fear. But my brain, fried from 10 months of isolation and too much caffeine, decided to take a holiday. I looked at the most feared woman in the known universe, noticed the way her pointed ears twitched when she was annoyed, and the words just tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. I didn't call her Your Majesty. I didn't plead for my life. I looked at her, blinked, and said, "Wow, you're actually kind of cute when you're angry." The entire bridge of the Krellian flagship went silent. I could hear the hum of my own recycler. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had just insulted a goddess of war. I had signed my death warrant in the most embarrassing way possible. Vera froze. Her eyes widened, the embers turning into a raging inferno. I waited for the order to fire. I waited for the laser to vaporize my outpost. But then, something happened that no one in the history of the galaxy had ever seen. The sapphire skin on her cheeks began to change. A dark, pulsing crimson started to creep up her neck, flooding her face until she was a shade of purple I didn't know existed. The Empress of the Krellian Empire was blushing. And then, she did something even more terrifying. She cut the feed. For 3 minutes, I sat in total darkness. The silence of the void had never felt so heavy. I stared at the blank holographic projector, my own reflection staring back at me, a pale, sleep-deprived human who had just committed the ultimate diplomatic suicide. I expected the outpost to shudder. I expected the hull to buckle under the weight of a kinetic slug or a plasma burst. You don't call a Krellian Empress cute and live to tell the tale. It's like poking a sleeping supernova with a toothpick. I grabbed the edge of my console, my knuckles white. "Computer," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Status of the Krellian flagship?" The AI responded with its usual, hauntingly calm voice. "The vessel Star Eater remains in high orbit. Weapon systems are locked on our position, Arthur. However, their energy signatures are fluctuating. It appears they are experiencing a massive internal power surge." I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead. A power surge? Were they charging a planet killer? Was I about to become a smear of atoms across the sector? I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. I thought about my family back on Earth, about the small apartment in New Sydney I'd never see again, and the fact that my legacy would be the man who smalled the Empress to death. But the blast never came. Instead, the Cum's array flared back to life with a violent crackle. This time, it wasn't just the Empress. The projection expanded to show the entire bridge of the Star Eater. Dozens of Krellian officers, clad in terrifying black chrome, were standing perfectly still. Their eyes were wide, fixed on their leader. And there she was. Vera was no longer sitting on her throne. She was pacing. Her footsteps echoed through the speakers like thunderclaps. That crimson hue hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened, clashing beautifully and terrifyingly with her blue skin. She stopped abruptly and leaned into the camera. Her face was so close I could see the golden flecks in her glowing eyes. "Human," she hissed. The word felt like a blade. "Explain your insolence. Do you not realize who stands before you? I have burned worlds. I have conquered the unreachable reach. I am the Scourge of the Seven Suns. And you use a diminutive term meant for a hatchling?" The logic center of my brain was screaming at me to apologize, to beg, to grovel. But there's a weird thing about humans. When we get too scared, we sometimes loop back around to being incredibly stupid. "Look," I said, leaning back in my rickety chair, trying to project a confidence I definitely didn't have. "I'm just saying, the scowl doesn't work as well as you think it does. It's a bit much. Very villain in a low-budget Hollywood. You've got to look, Vera. I'm just calling it like I see it." The gasps from the Krellian bridge crew were audible. One officer actually fainted. Vera's hand drifted to the hilt of a blade that looked like it was forged from a collapsed star. "You dare use my name, without titles, without subservience?" She drew the blade an inch. The air in my cabin seemed to ionize. "I should come down there and tear your tongue from your throat." I shrugged, my heart rate redlining. "You could. Or you could tell me why a terrifying Empress is blushing like a cadet on her first shore leave because of one little compliment. Is humanity really the first species to tell you you're striking?" Vera froze again. The blade slid back into its sheath with a chilling click. She looked at her officers, who immediately turned their heads away, pretending to be very busy with their consoles. She turned back to me, her expression shifting from rage to something else, something sharper, more calculating. "Strike him from the sensors," she commanded her crew. "And prepare my personal shuttle. I will handle this human interrogation myself." My blood ran cold. She wasn't going to blow me up. She was coming over. The sound of a Krellian atmospheric thruster is something you feel in your teeth before you hear it with your ears. It's a low, predatory growl that says, "I am the apex, and you are the prey." As the shadow of the Empress's shuttle swept over my narrow viewport, I realized I hadn't cleaned the outpost in 3 weeks. There were empty nutrient pouches stuck to the floor, and a stack of technical manuals acting as a coffee table. I was about to host the most powerful being in the quadrant in a room that smelled faintly of recycled sweat and desperate hope. I scrambled to stand up, tripping over my own feet. The docking ring groaned a sound of metal complaining against metal as the shuttle locked onto my tiny airlock. My station felt like a tin can being gripped by a giant. If she didn't like what she saw, she wouldn't even need to fire a weapon. She could just pull away without disengaging the clamps and tear my home in half. The airlock cycled with a hiss of pressurized gas. The inner door slid open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Vera stepped inside. In the cramped confines of Outpost 74, she looked even more impossible. Her head nearly brushed the ceiling, and the sheer physical presence of her, the scent of cold metal and something like crushed violets, filled every cubic inch of the space. She didn't look around. She looked directly at me. "You are small," she stated. Her voice was no longer being distorted by a Comes array. It was rich, resonant, and carried the weight of 1,000 years of aristocratic rule. "And your habitat is primitive. My people kept livestock in better conditions during our Bronze Age." "Welcome to the frontier, Your Majesty," I said, trying to steady my breathing. "We call it minimalist. Can I offer you some water?" It was a cloud 3 days ago, but the recycler says it's 99% pure. She ignored the offer, stepping closer until she was well within my personal bubble. She was a blue-skinned goddess of destruction, and I was a guy in a wrinkled flight suit. She reached out a gloved hand, her fingers hovering just inches from my face. I didn't flinch. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by the realization that I could see the individual pores of her skin and the way her pupils dilated when she looked at me. "Why are you not trembling?" she demanded. "I can smell the adrenaline in your system. I can hear the frantic rhythm of your heart. You are terrified, Arthur Penhaligon. Yet your eyes, they do not look at me with the fear of a victim. They look at me with curiosity." In my defense, I managed to squeak out, "I haven't seen another person in 10 months. You're a lot to take in. And I wasn't lying before. The red looks good on you. It breaks up the blue." The crimson flush returned instantly, spreading across her cheekbones. She let out a sharp, frustrated breath that sounded like a steam vent. "You are a maddening creature. In the hegemony, if a commoner spoke to me of my appearance, I would have their lineage erased from the archives. And yet, you stand here, in this pathetic bubble, and you treat me as if I am a peer. Or worse, a plaything." "Not a plaything," I corrected, my voice gaining a bit of strength. "Just a person. Humans have this weird trait. We find beauty in the most dangerous places. We climb volcanoes to see the lava. We chase storms just to feel the wind. And apparently, we call Empresses cute because we don't know when to shut up." Vera leaned in even closer, her glowing eyes searching mine for any hint of a lie. "Beauty," she whispered, the word sounding foreign on her tongue. "Is that what you see? You see a storm? Or do you see a weapon?" "I see a woman who has forgotten what it's like to have someone talk to her without shaking," I said softly. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a plasma torch. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she did something that made my heart stop entirely. She unlatched the heavy ceremonial collar of her armor. The plates hissed as they detached, revealing the soft line of her throat. She wasn't preparing to kill me. She was making herself vulnerable. But before she could speak, the station's proximity alarm began to wail. "Arthur," the AIS voice cut through the silence. "We have a problem. A Xylos hegemony cloaked frigate has just decloaked. They are locking torpedoes on both this station and the Empress's shuttle. They think they've found a way to take out the Krellian leader while she's distracted by a lone human." Vera's eyes snapped toward the viewport, the crimson blush replaced by a lethal cold fury. She looked at me, then at the docking ring. "They think me weak," she growled. "They think humanity is a shield for my distraction." She turned back to me, a predatory grin spreading across her face. "Tell me, Arthur Penhaligon, how well can this tin can fly?" "Fly?" I stammered, looking at the blinking red lights on my console. "Vera, this isn't a starship. It's an observation post. It has the aerodynamic properties of a brick and the thrusters of a lawnmower." The Empress didn't care. She lunged for the command chair, my chair, and practically threw me into the secondary navigator's seat. Her fingers flew across the human interface with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for someone who had never seen a Dell keyboard before. "Then we shall make this brick scream," she hissed. Outside the viewport, the space around us warped. A Xylos frigate, a jagged skeletal ship painted the color of dried blood, shimmered into view. They had been hiding in the shadow of the moonlit, waiting for this exact moment. A flash of light erupted from their bow. "Incoming torpedo," the eye shrieked. "Brace!" Vera commanded. She didn't dive, she didn't run. She fired the station's maneuvering thrusters in a sequence so violent it felt like my spine was trying to exit through my throat. The entire outpost groaned, the metal screaming as we pivoted on a dime. The torpedo whizzed past our viewport, missing us by a margin so thin I could see the serial numbers on its casing. "You're insane," I yelled over the roar of the straining engines. "You're going to shake this place apart." "Life is lived in the shaking, Arthur," she shouted back. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me with cold authority or embarrassed rage. She was smiling. It was a terrifying, beautiful expression of pure adrenaline. "Your species. You build things that barely hold together, yet you hurl yourselves into the void anyway. I find it intoxicating." The Xylos frigate wasn't giving up. They realized their mistake. They hadn't just caught the Empress, they had cornered humanity. They opened up with their point defense cannons, stitching lines of white-hot fire across the void. The station rocked. A warning light turned a sickening shade of magenta. "Hull breach in the recycler unit," the AI reported. "Oxygen levels dropping." "Vera, your shuttle," I pointed toward the docking ring. "It has shields. It has weapons. Get back to it and get out of here." She glanced at the airlock, then back at me. The crimson hue was back, but this time it wasn't a blush of embarrassment. It was the flush of battle. "If I leave, they will vaporize this post within seconds of my departure. My shuttle's AI is slave to my biometric signature. It will defend the docking port as long as I am on board this structure." She grabbed my hand, her grip like a vice. "We are the bait, Arthur. And I have never been very good at being the worm. We need to get closer." "Closer?" I screamed. "They have cannons. We have a microwave and a telescope." "We have a gravity well," she countered, pointing to the moonlet we were anchored to. "And we have a human who's too stupid to be afraid. Arthur, I need you to bypass the safety protocols on your docking clamps. We are going to drop this station onto their heads." I looked at her. She was serious. The most powerful woman in the galaxy wanted to use my home as a kinetic projectile. If we timed it wrong, we'd be crushed against the Xylos hull. If we timed it right, well, I'd still be homeless. "On 3? I asked, my finger hovering over the emergency release. "On now," she growled. I slammed the override. The explosive bolts fired with a deafening thud. Freedom felt like a freefall. The station drifted, caught in the moonlit's gravity, falling straight toward the Xylos frigate that was positioned directly below us. They tried to bank away, but they were too slow. We were a 10-ton hunk of metal falling from the sky. But just as we were about to make contact, the Xylos ship did something unexpected. They didn't fire their engines to move, they fired a tractor beam. They didn't want to dodge us anymore, they wanted to catch us. They wanted the Empress alive. The world didn't end in fire. It ended in a sickening, magnetic jolt. The tractor beam hit us like a physical wall, pinning my internal organs against my ribs. Outpost 74 groaned, every bolt and weld protesting as the Xylos frigate reeled us in like a hooked fish. We weren't falling anymore. We were being abducted. "They're dragging us into their primary docking bay," I gasped, fighting the nausea. "Vera, if we go in there, it's over. They'll have an entire battalion of Xylos shock troops waiting for us. Even you can't fight off 100 soldiers in a hallway." Vera didn't look worried. She looked focused. She stood up from the navigator's seat, her movements fluid and deadly. She began re-snapping the plates of her ceremonial armor back into place, the violet light of her suit pulsing in rhythm with her breathing. You underestimate the Krellian definition of a fair fight, Arthur. To Xylos, 100-to-1 is a tactical advantage. To me, it is merely a target-rich environment. She turned to me, and for a split second, that flash of crimson returned to her cheeks. But you are soft. You have no armor, no blades. You have only that cute mouth of yours. Hey, it's gotten me this far, I joked, though my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. What's the plan? Do I hide in the cabinets or do I provide witty commentary while you dismantle a small army? Neither, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. She reached into a hidden compartment on her thigh and pulled out a small metallic sphere that hummed with a suppressed energy. This is a Krellian pulse node. When we touch down, the atmosphere in their bay will be pressurized. I am going to breach the station's hull intentionally. The vacuum will pull their troops toward the void, and this node will scramble their internal dampeners. Wait, I stood up, my eyes wide. Breach the hull? Intentionally? Vera, I need air to do things like live and not die. She stepped close to me, her height casting a long shadow over the cramped cabin. Before I could protest further, she reached out, her gloved hand cupping the back of my neck. Her forehead pressed against mine, a Krellian gesture I later learned was reserved for blood brothers or lovers. Trust me, Arthur of Earth, you called me cute. Now see if you can keep up with terrifying. The station slammed into the Xylos docking cradle. The impact shattered my coffee mug, my favorite mug, the one with the picture of a cat in a spacesuit. That was the last straw. I looked at the monitors and saw the Xylos boarding party lumbering. Reptilian humanoids in heavy-powered suits leveling their plasma rifles at our airlock. Computer, I barked. A sudden surge of humanity is done with this crap energy taking over. Dump the waste management tanks through the external venting ports. If we're going out, we're making sure they need a very long shower. Vera let out a sharp, barking laugh. I like your spirit, human. She punched the manual release on the floor plating. The explosive decompression was instantaneous. A roar of rushing air filled my ears as the atmosphere screamed out of the station. I felt the tug of the void, my lungs burning. But Vera's hand was a tether, holding me firmly to a structural strut. Through the swirling mist of ice crystals and venting waste, I saw the Xylos troops being swept off their feet, their heavy boots sliding on the slick, frozen debris of my recycled dinner. Vera didn't wait. She leaped into the breach, her obsidian blade glowing with a hungry light. I scrambled to pull on my emergency oxygen mask, watching through the hole in my floor as the Empress of the Krellian Empire turned a high-tech docking bay into a slaughterhouse. She moved like a blur of blue and violet, her blade carving through power armor as if it were parchment. But then, I saw it. A Xylos sniper, perched on a gantry high above the chaos, was leveling a heavy disruptor at the back of her head. Vera was too busy with the 3 guards in front of her. She didn't see him. She couldn't hear him over the alarms. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have a gun. I didn't have armor. But I did have a 19th century physics textbook and a very powerful magnetic crane used for moving cargo. I didn't think. Thinking is for people who aren't about to watch their favorite alien empress get her brains turned into a strawberry smoothie. I lunged for the crane controls, an ancient clunky joystick that looked like it belonged in an arcade from the 1980s. The Xylos sniper was steadying his breath, his finger tightening on the trigger of that disruptor. Arthur, what are you doing? The AI screamed in my ear. The magnetic crane is rated for heavy metals, not precision combat. Then it's a good thing that sniper is wearing a tin suit. I yelled. I slammed the throttle forward. Outside, the massive industrial arm of the outpost, a limb meant for grabbing supply crates, swung around with a groan of protesting hydraulics. It wasn't elegant. It was a 10-ton metal fist moving at 60 miles per hour. The sniper didn't even have time to look up. The magnetic plate at the end of the crane hit the gantry with the sound of a falling skyscraper. The Xylos warrior, along with half the catwalk, was instantly flattened against the far wall. The disruptor shot went wide, punching a hole in a nearby fuel line instead of Vera's skull. Vera spun around, her blade dripping with glowing green Xylos blood. She saw the crushed gantry, then looked up at me through the breach in the floor. For a second, her combat-hardened face shifted. She didn't look like a conqueror. She looked impressed. She gave me a sharp, jagged nod, the universal sign for nice kill, kid, before diving back into the fray. But we weren't out of the woods. The fuel line the sniper had hit started venting hyper-reactive coolant. A thick, white fog began to fill the docking bay, obscuring everything. I could hear the sounds of clashing metal and the wet thuds of bodies hitting the floor, but I couldn't see my Empress. Vera! I shouted into the mask, my voice muffled. Get back to the station. The gas is going to ignite. Not yet. Her voice crackled over the short-range comms. Their commander is still breathing. I will not leave a Xylos captain to boast that he survived a Krellian shadow strike. Forget the pride. I screamed, watching the sparks from a dying electrical panel drift toward the gas cloud. If this place blows, pride won't keep you from being vaporized. I saw a flash of violet light in the mist. Vera emerged, dragging a massive, four-armed reptilian by his collar. She looked like a demon out of an old Earth myth, covered in soot, blood, and cold fury. She tossed the commander into the void of the docking bay and leaped toward the outpost's breached hull. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grabbed the edge of her armor, pulling her back into the safety of my ruined home. We hit the floor hard. Computer, seal the emergency shutters. Now! The metal plates slammed shut just as the docking bay turned into a sun. The explosion rocked the outpost, sending us tumbling across the floor in a tangle of limbs and blue armor. The station groaned, spinning wildly away from the shattered Xylos frigate. Silence followed. Deep, ringing silence. I was pinned under Vera's weight. Her armor was hot to the touch, and her breathing was ragged. We were both alive, but the station was dying. Warning lights were flashing in every color of the rainbow, and the air was getting thin. I looked up at her. Her helmet had been damaged, the faceplate cracked, revealing her sapphire skin and those burning embers she called eyes. The crimson blush was gone. In its place was a look of raw, unfiltered adrenaline. She stared at me, her face inches from mine. "You saved me," she whispered. A human with no claws, no fangs, and a thirst for minimalist living. "You saved the Empress of the Seven Suns." "Well," I coughed, my chest aching. "I couldn't let you die." "You still haven't told me if you actually liked being called cute." Vera let out a sound that started as a growl and ended as a laugh, a real, genuine laugh that sent shivers down my spine. She leaned down, her forehead pressing against mine again. But this time it was different. It was softer. "You are the most infuriating creature in the galaxy, Arthur Penhaligon." "And you are right," the scowl. "It is a bit much," but then, the station's main power died. The lights flickered and went out. We were drifting in the dark, and I could hear the sound of the hull buckling. We had survived the Xylos, but we were about to be claimed by the vacuum. The darkness of Outpost 74 was absolute, save for the faint, dying glow of Vera's armor. We were drifting, no thrust, no sensors, just two heartbeats in a cold metal coffin. The air was getting heavy, that metallic tang of rising carbon dioxide beginning to sting the back of my throat. It's funny. You spend your whole life thinking about the big moments, but when the end comes, you just notice how cold your toes are. "Arthur," Vera's voice was a low vibration in the dark. She hadn't moved. She was still draped over me, her weight a grounding pressure against the floating sensation of 0G. "My fleet will be searching. They saw the explosion. They will find the wreckage. Unless the Xylos reinforcements arrive first," I whispered. I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "And even then, this station is shielded against long-range scans. We're a ghost in the machine, Vera. We're a pebble in a sandstorm." I felt her hand move. Not toward a weapon, but toward mine. Her fingers were long, her skin smooth but as hard as polished stone. She squeezed my hand, and for a second, I forgot about the lack of oxygen. I forgot about the Krellian Empire and the United States Space Command. It was just a guy and a girl at the end of the world. In my culture, she began, her voice unusually soft, we are taught that the stars are the spirits of fallen warriors. We are told to never show weakness, for the stars are always watching. I have lived my life under that gaze. Every word a command. Every breath a calculated display of power. She shifted, her face catching the last dying ember of a status light. And then I meet a human who calls me cute. A human who throws a crane at a sniper. You do not look at the stars for approval, do you, Arthur? The stars are just gas and fusion, Vera, I said, my voice growing weaker. I'd rather look at something that can look back, something that feels. She was silent for a long time. The only sound was the creaking of the cooling metal around us. I felt my eyes getting heavy. Sleep seemed like a very good idea, a warm, inviting blanket. Arthur, she hissed, shaking me gently. Stay with me. You cannot leave yet. I have not decided your punishment for your earlier insolence. Is it a promotion? I joked, though it felt like I was talking through a mouthful of cotton. It is a debt, she replied. Krellians do not leave debts unpaid. You saved my life. You saw me blush. You saw me laugh. That makes you the most dangerous man in the galaxy, for you possess the only weapon that can truly disarm me. Suddenly, a dull thud echoed through the hull. Not a blast, but a physical contact, then another. It was a rhythmic metallic tapping. Clang, clang, clang. Magnetic boots, Vera whispered, her body tensing. She reached for her blade, the obsidian metal singing as it left the sheath. Someone is on the hull. Was it the Krellian rescue party? Or was it a Zelos boarding team looking to finish the job and claim the Empress's head as a trophy? I tried to sit up, but the world spun. Vera stood up, her silhouette a jagged shadow against the dark. She stepped toward the airlock, her blade glowing a faint, menacing violet. The outer door groaned. Someone was overriding the manual bypass. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked around for a weapon, but the only thing within reach was a half-eaten tube of protein paste. I gripped it anyway. If I was going down, I was going down swinging, or at least making a mess. The inner airlock door began to slide open. A blinding white light flooded the room, cutting through the darkness like a knife. Vera lunged, a war cry tearing from her throat that sounded like a choir of angels and demons. But the figure in the doorway didn't move. They raised a hand, and a voice human, bored, and incredibly familiar echoed through the station. Whoa, whoa! Easy there, Big Blue. We're the good guys, mostly. The violet blade stopped less than an inch from a very human throat. Standing in the airlock, framed by the harsh glare of searchlights, was a man in a scuffed leather flight jacket and a tactical headset. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a guy who had just spent 14 hours fixing a warp drive with duct tape and spite. Behind him stood a squad of UN Space Command Marines, their rifles lowered, but their eyes wide as they stared at the 7-foot-tall Sapphire Goddess, currently threatening to decapitate their commander. Commander Miller? I croaked, the sudden influx of light making my head throb. Penhaligon, the man said, pushing Vera's blade aside with a terrifying amount of casualness. You're 3 hours late for your check-in, and I see you've made a friend. A very tall, very armed friend. Vera didn't lower her sword. Her eyes were narrowed, the crimson flush long gone, replaced by the icy mask of an Empress. You are the reinforcements for this outpost, she demanded. You are late. This human almost perished defending a station your species failed to secure. Miller looked at me, then back at Vera, then at the smoking hole in my floor. We had to dodge a Xylos debris field on the way in. Apparently, someone decided to turn a frigate into a fireworks display. Care to comment, Arthur? It was a joint effort, I said, trying to stand up and failing miserably. Vera's hand was suddenly there, catching my elbow and hoisting me up as if I weighed nothing. The Marines shifted uncomfortably, their fingers twitching near their triggers. "Easy, boys," Miller signaled his team to stand down. "The Krellian fleet is currently scrubbing the rest of the Xylos presence from the sector. They're looking for their Empress. They seemed, let's say, highly motivated to find her. If we don't hand her over in one piece, Earth becomes a very shiny parking lot." Vera stepped forward, her presence dwarfing the Marines. "I will go to my people. But the human comes with me." The room went dead silent. Miller blinked. "Excuse me?" "Private Penhaligon is a member of the USSC. He has debriefings, paperwork, and probably a very long psychiatric evaluation ahead of him. He is a witness to the attempted assassination of a sovereign." Vera countered, her voice dropping into that tone that made planets tremble. "And he is under my personal protection. He has seen the Empress of the Seven Suns in a state of emotional flux. He is either my guest, or he is a liability I cannot leave in your hands. Which would you prefer?" I looked at Miller. He looked at me. He looked at the massive obsidian blade still humming in Vera's hand. He sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Arthur, do you want to go with the terrifying alien lady who could crush you like a grape?" I looked at Vera. She wasn't looking at Miller anymore. She was looking at me. There was a challenge in her eyes, but also a strange, hidden plea. She was the most powerful person in the room, but she was also the person who had blushed because I thought she was cute. "My lease on this place was up anyway," I said, offering a weak grin. "And I think I left my favorite mug on the Xylos ship. I might need help getting it back." As we walked toward the airlock, leaving the confused Marines behind, Vera leaned down toward my ear. "You are a fool, Arthur Penhaligon. You are leaving your own kind for a life of war and courtly intrigue." "Yeah, well," I whispered back. "At least the food has to be better than protein paste. And I haven't finished our conversation about your scowl." She didn't answer, but as we stepped into the umbilical leading to her personal shuttle, I saw the faintest, quickest flicker of red across her sapphire cheek. The Krellian flagship, Star Eater, wasn't just a ship. It was a floating cathedral of war. As we stepped off the shuttle, I was greeted not by a firing squad, but by 1,000 elite warriors slamming their fists against their chest plates in a rhythmic, deafening salute. The sound vibrated in my marrow. Vera walked with her head high, the perfect image of a cold, untouchable monarch, but her hand never left my shoulder. Her grip was a message to her people. "This one is mine." We were ushered into the High Council chamber, a room made of translucent violet glass that overlooked the swirling nebula of the Clayth system. The air here was rich, smelling of incense and ancient dust. 12 High Lords of the Krellian Empire sat in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on me like predators watching a strange new insect. "Empress," the eldest lord spoke, his voice like grinding stones. "You returned from the void with a biological curiosity. The Xylos claim the human attacked them. The humans claim we are infringing on their sovereignty, and you bring this creature into the sacred heart of our empire." Vera let go of my shoulder and stepped into the center of the ring. The light of the nebula caught the sapphire of her skin, making her glow. "This creature saved my life," she stated, her voice echoing with a power that made the glass walls vibrate. When my own sensors failed to detect the Xylos treachery, he saw. When I was surrounded, he fought. He used their own physics against them with the primitive tools of his kind. The lords whispered among themselves. I stood there, feeling very small in my dirty flight suit, acutely aware that I hadn't showered in 3 days. I felt like a stray dog that had been invited to a royal banquet. "Gratitude is one thing, Vera," the old lord countered. "But he has seen you. Diminished. The reports from the bridge crew say he spoke to you with a familiarity that borders on heresy. They say he used a word, cute. The word hung in the air like a poisonous gas. The lords looked at me with genuine horror. In their culture, cute was a term for a larval stage pet, something weak and utterly beneath notice. To apply it to the Empress was more than an insult. It was a conceptual impossibility. Vera stiffened. I could see the muscles in her back tighten. I knew that if she didn't handle this right, the Council would see her as weak. And in the Krellian Empire, a weak ruler was a dead one. I had to do something. I had to use the humanity card. I stepped forward, ignoring the way the guards leveled their pikes at my chest. "If I may," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "In my culture, we have many words for power. We call the sun mighty, and we call the ocean vast. But when we see something that is so dangerous, so beautiful, and so completely out of our league that it makes our brains short-circuit, we use words that don't make sense." I looked directly at Vera, who was staring at me with wide eyes. I didn't call her cute because she's weak. I called her cute because she was the first thing in 10 months that made me feel like the universe wasn't just a cold, empty box. I called her that because I wasn't afraid of the Empress. I was captivated by the woman. A heavy silence followed. I expected to be vaporized. I expected to be tossed out of the nearest airlock. Instead, Vera did something she had never done in front of her council. She smiled. It wasn't a predatory grin this time. It was a soft human expression. And then, the crimson flush returned, bright, vivid, and unmistakable, spreading across her face in front of the most powerful men in her empire. The High Lords sat in stunned silence. They weren't looking at a weak leader. They were looking at a goddess who had found something they couldn't conquer with ships or blades. They were looking at the one thing the Krellians feared most, a human who wasn't afraid to love a monster. The High Lord of the Council opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. The sight of the Empress blushing, smiling, and looking at a mere human with something akin to reverence had shattered centuries of Krellian tradition in a single heartbeat. He slowly sat back down, his stony expression softening into one of defeated awe. He realized what the rest of the galaxy was about to find out. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their fleets. It was their audacity to find the heart in anything, no matter how cold or ancient. Vera turned back to the council, her voice now ringing with a new kind of authority. "Arthur Penhaligon will remain on the Star Eater as the first High Ambassador of Earth. He will not be a prisoner, nor a curiosity. He will be my shadow." She stepped toward me, her hand finding mine once more. "And if any among you find his vocabulary lacking, you may take it up with me, personally." No one moved. No one dared. Weeks later, I stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching the stars drift by. I wasn't in a cramped, 6-meter pressure bubble anymore. I was wearing robes of Krellian silk and obsidian thread. I had gone from being a guy who recycled his own sweat to the most influential man in 3-star systems. The door behind me slid open with a soft chime. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air always felt a little more electric when she was near. Vera walked to the glass, standing beside me. She wasn't wearing her armor. She was in a simple, flowing gown of violet light. "The humans have sent a formal inquiry," she said, her eyes fixed on the distant nebula. "They want to know if you are being treated well. They want to know if the diplomatic incident has been resolved. And what are you going to tell them?" I asked, glancing at her. She turned to me, and for a second I saw it, the twitch of her pointed ears, the golden flecks in her eyes, and that familiar stubborn scowl she wore when she was trying to hide a smile. "I will tell them that the ambassador is busy. I will tell them that he is currently teaching the Empress the finer points of human minimalist living." I laughed, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair from her sapphire cheek. "You know, Vera, you're still doing it." "Doing what?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "The scowl," I whispered. "It's still a bit much, but you're right. It is striking." The crimson flush returned, as reliable as the sunrise, and she let out that sharp, beautiful laugh that had become my favorite sound in the universe. We weren't just two different species anymore. We were a bridge. Humanity had reached into the dark, and instead of finding a monster, We had found a friend who just needed to be told she was special. I looked out at the endless black, no longer feeling small or forgotten. Because in the vastness of the galaxy, I had found the one thing worth sitting in a small dark space for. And she was definitely, undeniably, cute. If you enjoyed this journey into the stars and the unexpected heart of a warrior, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe to HFY Soundscape for more incredible tales of human audacity and alien wonder. We've got plenty more stories that prove humans are the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. See you in the next one.